All right. Thanks for being here. Robert Boog, real estate broker, reader, writer. How does real estate writing compare to research writing?
That's a good question. Real estate writing usually are my original thoughts that from my experience, whereas real research writing is more from what I'm reading and doing the research of other people. So yeah, with the first book I wrote was called Selling Homes 123, and that was really about my experience of being taught originally when you show homes, you're supposed to use the Goldilocks approach, which was you show you show a buyer a less affordable home than one that's more less affordable, and then even out of their budget, and then the perfect home, or kind of like Goldilocks. And I discovered that it didn't really work, that people were too busy. So I just tried to show them the best home first. And but when I learned kind of the hard way that I was taught that don't worry about qualifying buyers. Buyers will always find the money to buy a house. And so in the late 1980s, around 1986 or so, one of my transactions fell through, and then we started getting buyers to bring in their income documentation to me. So I had a system where you had to bring me three things, and only three things, before we met. And that was enough pay stubs for 1 month, your last 2 years W-2s, and 3 bank statements. And with that and an appraisal, I could sell any house. So I would have kind of an advantage over people. And as a result, after the earthquake, I was able to sell more homes in my area than anyone. And they were asking me how I did it. And so so I wrote this book called Selling Homes 123, and it became like a modest bestseller. And a lot of people reached out after that for real estate advice and stuff like that. So yeah, my real estate stuff was from my own personal experience, what worked. And then I got into, about 5 years ago, less than that, more like 3 years ago, I got into Shakespeare. And I don't know why, but I think I know why. What bothered me was for something to last over 400 years. So if there are these written works, they have to be based on truth. And the explanation that people give for William Shakespeare's writing is he had a great imagination. And I just didn't buy that. I felt that it had to be based on truth. That's the only way it would last that long. I dabble in songwriting, and I know that in songwriting, you have to have a kernel of truth at least. And without that, things won't last. It would be like John Lennon's song, Imagine. That's going to last. Whereas I'm the Walrus, not so much, because, one is based on truth and the other is just kind of a fun song.
So truth wins out over fun?
Yes.
With the Shakespeare thing, I know there was a movie about it. I'm not sure how long ago it was. Things all blend together. Just about it being the Duke or whatever the other guy was that was writing political type themes, and then Shakespeare was just the front man for it. And I'm not sure if that changes the importance or the space for Shakespeare in the world, whether it was the Duke or the Stratford von Avon guy.
It was
what's your view on that?
Yeah, it was the Earl of Oxford.
Okay.
The 17th Earl of Oxford. So yeah, nowadays there are two camps. One is called Oxfordianism, and the other is called Stratfordism, because the guy from Stratford, that most people know as William Shakespeare. We generally refer to as Stratford, and just the writing as the works of William Shakespeare.
Was
So
Shakespeare Shakespeare's name, or was it a stage name or a pen name? Are there a lot of Shakespeares out there in the world? Is that a popular surname?
yeah, it was a popular surname, or is. However, I think that it was more of like a term for male self satisfaction or self pleasure, if you know what I mean.
Oh, nice.
So I think that's kind of how I think it started as like a kind of a joke, and everybody in the know would have understood back then. If there was a hyphen in a name, and this is again research, this is what I've read, that if there was a hyphen in the name Shakespeare, like in the sonnets, that meant that it was a pseudonym. Now I look at it like more as an allonym rather than a pseudonym. And here's the difference. An allonym is a person who is actually alive and living and breathing, who can collect a paycheck. Whereas a pseudonym is the same person, like I think the name Andy Kronisberg writes under Woody Allen or something like that. It's kind of it's the same person. Whereas 70 years ago there was a real living man, living, breathing, everything, who won the Oscar for Roman Holiday, and his name was Ian McClellan Hunter, and he and a guy named Joe Dighton wrote the screenplay, and the story by was Ian McClellan Hunter. And we know that he was a real person because he did movies and TV, and he worked as a screenwriter. However, even though he won the Oscar and collected the paycheck for Roman Holiday, he didn't actually write Roman Holiday. It was written by a man named Dalton Trumbo, who was blacklisted at the time by the U.S. government and sent to prison for a year and a half because he didn't reveal any sources when asked. So after kind of the Red Scare blew over, he tried to get a job and nobody would hire him. Now imagine, this is the guy who wrote Spartacus, he wrote Roman Holiday, he wrote 7 Seconds Over Tokyo. He wrote all kinds of The Brave One. So everybody in the know knew him, but Hollywood would not hire him. So he sued, and he passed away in 1976. And in like 2013 or 2014, Hollywood finally, or the Academy finally, gave him full credit for Roman Holiday. So if this happened to Dalton Trumbo back when he wrote Roman Holiday in 1952, what if this happened to, or could it not have happened to somebody back in 1592 who was trying to shield himself from Queen Elizabeth's government, who didn't take, they were very authoritarian. And so if you wrote anything about Queen Elizabeth that she might take offense, you would either be maimed or put in jail or possibly put to death.
So why was it okay for Shakespeare, or the guy we know as Shakespeare, to publish under his name
Yeah.
versus the Earl?
Well, this is where I got into the picture, kind of where it really interested me or fascinated me, like that why question. I'm like one of those people who's a curious person, and there's a thing called the Tudor theory, the Prince Tudor theory, and what it says is that the Earl of Oxford had an affair with Queen Elizabeth, and they produced a love child, and his name was Henry Roseley. And the poem Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucrece are dedicated to Henry Roseley. So that's one theory. And the movie you were talking about, Anonymous, was talking about this theory that, if you kind of spoiler alert, but at the end of the movie, it's revealed that um, the Earl of Oxford was Queen Elizabeth's son and her lover and the father of Henry Rosalie. Now, that's kind of where my my latest book. It's a fictional book, but it's called The Trial of William Shakespeare. And what I do is I try to I'm not a big believer in all of that. I don't believe that he was the son. He might have been her lover. He might not have been. Um, but I do believe he was the author of the works attributed to Shakespeare.
How does that change history then, or is it just knowing?
Well, the reality is back then, if you were the son of a queen, then instead of going to James the First, who was like the half son of the woman that you beheaded, um, then he would have been king. So Henry Rosalie um, had to be kept a secret for political reasons that he was the son of Queen Elizabeth, um, and it doesn't really change it. It enriches the writings when you read it from the perspective of the Earl of Oxford, for example. Okay, I'll give you an example. Um, it's kind of a long story, but in 1588, there was a Spanish Armada, the war with England, and that year, the wife of Edward de Vere died. Her name was Anne Cecil de Vere. She died during childbirth. Then de Vere and his father-in-law came back like 1 month later, and then de Vere pretty much fell apart. I think he had a mental breakdown, and so they awarded his children to his father-in-law and his mother to be raised in Lord Cecil's household. De Vere had a daughter named Elizabeth, the oldest daughter, who was 14 years old, and living at Cecil House at that time was Henry Rosalie, who was the richest man in all of England at that time, but he was 16 years old. And William Cecil, being Elizabeth's grandfather, wanted to marry the two. And so they had a big party. And this is a scene this is basically where my book starts. I just imagine having a big party, flutes of champagne and, banging or ticking the top of the champagne flute with a spoon. Quiet, we have this announcement. My granddaughter Elizabeth Vere is going to marry Henry Rosalie, and Henry Rosalie, 16 years old, says no. He rejects the marriage proposal by the most powerful man in all of England. And William Cecil, at that time, I believe, then said, okay, I'll give you another year. He gave him another year. He refused again. And then William Cecil wrote had written a poem called Narcissus. And it was a poem written in Latin. So it wasn't translated until like 1994. But in it just bags on someone for having self-love and having no honor, basically, because he turned down his granddaughter's, the marriage proposal to his granddaughter. Now, if we look after that, the next thing that happens is the publication of Venus and Adonis. And if you just look at the dedication alone, you'll see the word honor 7 times and the name William Shakespeare at the bottom. So William Shakespeare lived roughly 100 miles away from London. So it would be kind of like somebody in San Diego being offended by what somebody said in Los Angeles at a time when there's like no communication, only writing, would someone from that far away know anything? On the other hand, Edward de Vere was the father of Elizabeth Vere. And I think that he was afraid of William Cecil, who was the most powerful man, but he wanted to get back and say, you know, it's okay. The kid says he's too young. He's not ready for marriage. Let it go. I mean, just allow him to, you know, be a kid. Or I think he was cool with it, even though William Cecil fined him £5,000, which would be like $5 million in today's money. The bottom line is now comes out a play called Romeo and Juliet. They're two families feuding. Now, Henry Rosalie's father was named Anthony Brown, and he was he was his last name, or it was like the Earl of Montague or something like that. So in the play Romeo and Juliet, we have the Montagues versus the Capulets. Capulet is an anagram for like teacup, I think, or teal teacup. I mean, you could play around with it. But William Cecil was a collector. His wife collected teacups. So it's kind of like, yeah, you can look at this stuff, but when you realize that they're kind of like putting real people into these things, suddenly the plays become much more richer, and you understand a little bit more about, you know, like why they were written and what was really going on.
So then, do you think the Earl used the name William Shakespeare just as a generic name, or knew a person, or used the name and then had to find a person to fill the spot? I'm still there. So, little technical difficulty, but it's all fixed. So the question then is, did the Earl know William Shakespeare and attribute the stuff to him, or was it just a generic name he picked out and then he had to find a person name or that would play the part of William Shakespeare?
I think he had to pay him first. Like,
so he knew him first.
Yeah, I think there was a guy named Richard Field who was from Stratford-upon-Avon, who was a printer, and his shop was just steps away from where William Cecil's house was. And so what I believe is that he met him, and he probably introduced him when he first came to London. He was probably working at Richard Field's print shop, and asked him, hey, you want to make some extra money? It's going to be dangerous, but here's, or possibly dangerous, here's the gig. You'll be paid this much for just putting your name on a couple of plays or a couple of poems. And I think that he just hit him back in Stratford-upon-Avon. Just go back there. They'll never find you there. So I don't think William Shakespeare actually went back to London until like probably 1598. I think it was really late. And the reason why is, if you look at the original quartos, they're all mentioning, or they have the word anonymous on the front of the plays that we would attribute to Shakespeare. And so that was because William Cecil, the most powerful man in England, died in 1598. So I think he was ruthless. There was a guy named John Stubbs who wrote something like that the Queen was too old to give birth to an heir, and they dragged him out of bed one day, brought him to the town center, took his right hand and chopped it off with a meat cleaver. So writers did not have the right to say anything that could be interpreted as being detrimental or offensive to the Queen. Now you're talking about
the current state in the UK is not unlike the past state then.
And there you go.
So then they're labeled anonymous, and there's a danger in labeling it anonymous because people are just going to know that you wrote it when you have all this inside information on it. So you have to find somebody else that's willing to say, no, I wrote it. And it's just a play about this other thing.
Correct. That's what I think. Now there are people who obviously disagree, and what they say is the Earl of Oxford wrote other poems, although the Earl of Oxford was known for being the best poet at Queen Elizabeth's court. However, and a playwright as well, one of the best playwrights too for comedy, but none of his plays have survived. So Oxfordians say that he just wrote under the name William Shakespeare, and whereas Stratfordians say, no, this is our guy. William Shakespeare is the guy. He was the author. There should be. And the thing that bothered me about it was the most famous Shakespeare authority is a man by the name of Sir Stanley Wells, who says that like challenging history is immoral and should not be allowed. Things like this, where, well, all we're trying to find out is the truth. I think it just helps students question things. And I mean, when you write about Shakespeare, it's just helping to sharpen your critical thinking. At least that's what I thought when I was, learning about Shakespeare in college or high school. So, and knowing about Edward de Vere, I think it just, again, I think it makes things more interesting when you know the real person. It's kind of like knowing a songwriter or knowing the background to a song or something like that.
Yeah, it's a little behind the scenes. Like the work alone stands, and you can look at it and see how it's quoted and revered today even. And there's so many sayings that came from Shakespeare stuff. So you have the work, and then you have the intrigue of who wrote it, and was it this person or was it that person? I don't know, I guess.
So what I do,
I guess there's a reason for people to be on a side or another, but I don't understand why that would matter.
Yeah, well, the truth is always, important, I think. So, and that's what it boils down to. Some people just want, it's kind of like I'll die on my hill approach. Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. And so it's not, I've come to realize that there's nothing I can say that can convince somebody otherwise. I think that you have to do your own research and look into it. And what I did in the Trial of William Shakespeare, that's what the book is about, really. It's just saying, I think there's something here, and I think you should look into it. And that's what I'm trying to do, get more people interested and just look at it. Because some of these Shakespeare research books they cost over $200, $270, $222. I mean, it's ridiculous. So the book I put out is like $6. And so anybody with the internet connection, cell phone, you can check the links that I've provided. You can, fact check me. You can go through, join the mystery. I want to get everybody involved because I think it's fun. I think it's if you're into mysteries or, don't mind traveling down a rabbit hole or two. And again, my story is fictional. So, but it's all based on fact. And the facts of the case are that Edward de Vere did not talk to his wife for 5 years. And then they got back together. And so that was that's another question that I tried to make it a love story. Like, how did they get back together? Tried to explain it, fill in the gaps. So what I did when I bring William Shakespeare onto trial and Edward de Vere in a modern courtroom. So in real estate in roughly, when was this? I think it was April. I went to court with a client, and I noticed that the judge used he had a laptop. Now I'm in the courtroom. Had to drive 24 miles to get to this courtroom, and the judge did not address anyone in the courtroom, the audience who had cases there, after the lunch break. He was always on the laptop talking to these other attorneys. So it's great for attorneys, the Zoom conferences. They don't have to drive there. But when you have something, here I've got a client, he's trying to make an overbid on a probate, so I have to be there with him, and he's got to bring his money and stuff like that, where I'm forced to be there. I'm thinking, man, I wish I could just Zoom here. But so what I did is, one little thing I noticed was the spelling. In the letters of Edward de Vere, for example, he replaces the W in the word you he replaces a U with a W. So it's spelled yow. Like every time he spells the word you, it's a yow. So I wondered to myself, I wonder if there's any of this in Shakespeare. So there's a website called shakespeareswords.com. They have all the words you can just put in a word. So I put in yow. Showed up one time in the play Pericles. So I thought, well, I wonder if there are any words. I mean, that would be pretty easy. If I'm an editor or something, or if I wanted to disguise Edward de Vere's authorship, I would say, well, you better get rid of that W. I mean, it shows up every time in you. But what if there were other words that sound like you or have the same sound, vowel sound, like the word hour. So I did hour, and he spells it, Shakespeare does, HOWER 38 times. Then I tried Douglas, DOUGLAS, and he spells it DOWGLAS. And that was, again, like 56 times or something. So I think that Edward de Vere wrote the Shakespeare canon. That's my firm belief. And there are others that believe, Mark Twain believed this, Sigmund Freud, there are tons of other, Charlie Chaplin. So I'm not the only crazy person. But if you doubt Shakespeare's authorship, people will call you all kinds of names, like you must believe in a flat earth, or you must believe that the moon landing never happened. And so that was the other part of this book, The Trial of William Shakespeare, is to, remove the stigma of just questioning something that seems like it should be questioned. And they tried to make you feel, bad for questioning it.
Do you think there's any room for there to have been collaboration between them?
Not between them. I think that William Shakespeare, they wanted him because if he was ever arrested, he wouldn't give anything up. If he tried to write his name, he couldn't even write his name. If you've ever seen the 6 signatures of William Shakespeare, do yourself a favor. You can Google it and just look at his signatures. It's crazy. So I don't think. Plus, his father was a farmer. Now, his father his mother owned a farm called Aspie's, and they sued to reclaim it in 1589. So William Shakespeare was part of a lawsuit to reclaim it. And as the oldest son, he would have taken over his father's business, basically. He would inherit the farm, he would inherit the house, everything like that. And that was just, that they called that primogeniture, I think. So, no, I don't think. Now, it is possible that the plays, however, Edward de Vere was kind of a very generous person. And so I think he did have 2 secretaries, John Lilly and Anthony Munday, who could have assisted him in having kind of like how TV scripts are written a lot of times. A small, like little group So if you have these two secretaries who were both noted writers, absolutely, I think that is possible.
Do you think then that Shakespeare ever had a conversation with the Earl, or it was just kept with the plausible deniability?
His conversation would have been, "I need more money," I think. And I think that's what he did. He blackmailed him because in the end, I think like in the last possible time period, which was around like 1602 or something like that, William Shakespeare bought this farmland and he paid £320. He bought this other place. It was a total of like almost exactly like 1,000. You know what I mean? If you add up all the sums. So yeah, I think that he just kept blackmailing him.
Is there any historical account for how involved Shakespeare was in the production of any of the plays? Like anything that happened at the Rose or anything like that? Maybe like the movie Shakespeare in Love? Or is that all just pure fiction?
Pure fiction. No, I don't.
Because Shakespeare wasn't in love with Gwyneth Paltrow.
No, although I do kind of like steal some of that in my own little fictional in my book, The Trial of William Shakespeare. I try to bring them together by them working on a play together, writing lines and things like that. So it's kind of a rip-off. But
yeah,
I even mention it. I mean, isn't this a rip-off from Shakespeare in Love?
Nobody's going to go to a play about a farmer that is a ghostwriter for some Earl. Yeah, that's what it needs to be.
Yeah.
So then with your publishing that, how did you publish that book?
I've self-published. I'm not as much of a writer as a rewriter. And the great thing about Amazon Kindle, it allows you unlimited rewrites. So I'm that's like poetry. I cannot write poetry. I'm terrible. Because it looks like something never finished. So I stay away from that genre. But I do some songwriting. And the great thing about songwriting is that you can be more, it's more forgiving. You can make more mistakes. But with Amazon Kindle, like if you wanted to change an entire chapter, you just go in and do it.
Yeah.
And I advise you, if you do self-publish, to go back in and look at it again, because they do have this this thing that will say you have 4 spelling errors or something like that in your manuscript, so you can go back and change things, and they want you to make the best product.
Right. Change all your U's to W's.
There you go.
With songwriting and poetry, then, how do you see that differently? I know you just said that songwriting is more forgiving, but what do you see the big difference between lyrics and poetry?
Well, this is for me again, trying to get the right word and feeling for poetry is something that would keep me up at night. Have you ever watched the TV show Monk? Where
I've seen some of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you should watch it from the very beginning. Like it's on Netflix or Peacock or something, but you can watch it from the very, very beginning and see his entire journey. But if you do, you'll see how like these little things bother him. If something's out of balance, he's got to correct it. And it's almost comical. It is comical because someone will think that, like a killer will think that he's noticing something, and he's just, concerned that the guy has lint on his shoulder or something. So yeah, little things like that.
it's not just poetry, but screenwriting too. It's just the certain little words that you have to go back in and redo and redo and redo. Where songwriting has more of the pattern to it. You've got the you know you've only got so many syllables for this line, and sometimes people can just make it up, la 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 la, so it's a lot more forgiving. You don't have to, and in writing you really don't like to repeat words, like in poetry or screenwriting. You kind of want to give readers a different word. You're not going to say the word walk all the time or something. And in songwriting, you hear walk this way, or like you'll hear the same word over 7 times in a song a lot of times. So it's a little bit different that way. It's a lot more forgiving, I think.
Do you do the music with the lyrics, or are you just doing lyrics?
Well, I'll tell you how it started. Being in real estate, my one of the things that you have to do is prospect every day. It's called shaking the bushes. And so my thing was and is calling people. And so after a while it gets kind of tiring. You call 100 people a day for over 30 years. You got to mentally get strong to do it. And so I was kind of lazing around, and my wife said, what do I have to do to get you to prospect today? Do I have to put a gun to your head? And then that was like a light bulb that went off, and this was about 10 years ago, I think, because I rushed off to Walmart and I bought a timer because I thought, what if that was true? Excuse me. What if that was true? What if you really did have someone put a gun to your head and said you had a prospect for 30 minutes? You wouldn't prospect for 28 minutes or 32. You would have to do the exact 30 minutes. You'd need to know that time. And now, of course, you can use your iPhone or whatever to time something. So I would do that. I would prospect. I use a timer to prospect. And then I got into this thing. Well, what if I just sat down and I put the timer at 18 minutes and pretended that somebody would had a gun to my head. And if I didn't come up with something in 18 minutes, my wife and kids would be dead or something. So I would, I play these little games like that. So I did that. I have this yellow line pad that I, carry with me all over the place. I was with this seller. She was showing me around her house, and she said, "Aren't you going to take any notes?" And I said, "Yeah, let me run back to my car and get my pad." I went back to my car, and it wasn't there. I had left it at a Starbucks. So I found another pad, and afterwards I drove to Starbucks and I said, "Hey, has anybody turned in a yellow line pad?" And she goes, the barista says, "Yeah, it's right here." And then she says, "I didn't know you were a songwriter." And I said, I'm thinking to myself, neither do I. I mean, and she said, "Oh, I know somebody that could sing that first song." And I'm thinking, what song? What is she talking about? But what I was doing, I guess subconsciously, when I would run out of things to say, I would repeat, and she took that as being like a chorus, right? So, so I did. I let her sing it. She put the guitar to it, and it sounded. I mean, it sounded good to me, and that's kind of how my songwriting journey started.
Was it notes about a house, like washer dryer upstairs, 2 bathrooms down, 2 bathrooms down?
No, it was it was like it was called A Gift of Love, and it went something like, "Woke up, today's my birthday, and now I'm 6 years old. I'm a little drunk on freedom, don't always do as I'm told. Wake up, today's my birthday. and mommy smiles at me. There's a birdie. Yeah, it's like I don't remember all the lyrics exactly, but it goes, he's green with yellow feathers and likes to tickle my neck. I feed him and I water him. He's my best birthday present yet. He's a gift of love, a gift from mom, gift of love, a gift from mom kind of thing. Woke up, today's my birthday. My sister envies me. I put my birdie on her shoulder and she laughs out suddenly. It goes on and on like that. And then it's like when I'm 26 years old, I see a woman with this little boy, and he's got on a green and yellow sweater or something. So it's kind of like that.
And what were you writing when you wrote that? Were you writing when you were prospecting? Were you writing about
No,
houses?
what I would do is I would set 18 minutes to just write something creatively. So it was supposed to be about just any thought that came to mind, I guess. So it was kind of like, I'm going to be selfish, and I'm going to carve out 18 minutes just for myself to do something creatively today. And then after that, and so that is what kind of started me into writing more outside the real estate genre, or even in the real estate genre. I kind of write when I'm busy. So I'll find, carve out a piece of time for me, and then I can play. This is my playtime kind of thing, my reward. And so that's kind of how I do writing, because I'm pretty busy. At the time, my wife and I have a real estate company. At one time we had 9, agents working under us and stuff. So I found myself working for for 9 other people basically, and I didn't have time for myself. So I wanted to have some time for myself. And then one year I fired everybody and just made it me and my wife and another, person. And I tripled my income then. So I wasn't running around doing everybody else's job kind of. So, and I was a lot happier too.
So then it sounds like your songwriting is lyrical, and that's closely related to poetry, if not the same thing. Just different types of poetry. I mean, you have the rhyming poetry, you have free verse, and a bunch of other different types. But
I'll be honest.
I feel like poetry and lyrics are kind of different, but it's hard to explain the difference.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I actually won a poetry contest at UCLA. So I don't mention that because I was kind of after I won this contest, I got teased a lot about it. And so I kind of I kind of didn't write for like 20 years probably. And then I was determined I'm not going to write any poetry. I just don't want to be, called a homo for doing that, I guess. That was what, I was ribbed and teased a lot and stuff. So
what were you going to school for?
English. I was thinking of going to, law school or something, but I studied my dad and mom were in real estate. So I got some books from the library, took a test. I studied, took the test, and passed. So my first week I sold a house, and I just kept going from there.
Wouldn't really expect poetry bullies in an English major at UCLA. Well, I think you might be a poet, so you better hone in on that. I don't think it has any designs on sexuality. I think everybody can be a poet. So,
yeah, I guess that was my own. It's kind of like a combination of things. I guess I was, the times were a lot different back then. It was
back
more
then, like 80s, 90s.
I graduated from UCLA in 1978. So yeah, that it was a different time, you know, different era. So it's in I kind of dabbled a little bit here and there writing, but not anything really. And actually, yeah, I said from then on I was just not going to do any poetry. So I kind of like um, I didn't write any poetry. I mean, and then I think I remember, yeah, one night I had this dream. I was kind of like waking up, and I had this thought, I guess, like, what if you were given this gift and you never used it? How would you feel, you know, afterward? And so then I thought, yeah, okay, so maybe I should start writing. And so I started, you know, slowly but surely, and kind of getting back into doing writing.
How do you see the connection with creativity? Where do you think creativity comes from?
Okay, so I meditate every day, and that has been a real help for me. And I follow, there's a woman, I don't know if you've ever, you might want to Google this or check her out, Abraham Hicks. She has these videos on YouTube. So the idea with meditation, if you do it first thing in the morning for around 15 minutes, like as soon as you wake up, then it sets the tone of your day, where you try to raise your vibration. And when you raise your vibration, okay, well, I guess it starts with the belief that we as humans are vibrational beings. So if you believe that, and that you can raise your vibration, you come in contact with your inner being. And your inner being is basically always connected to source energy, God, whatever you want to call the universal creative forces, whatever. So when you tap into that, then you'll get these hunches or subtle guidance kind of thing. And that's what I believe in. That's where the creativity comes. It's kind of like you tap into it more than it. And so
A lot of what I wonder about is what's the creative force doing when I'm not engaging with it? Like, is it sitting in an apartment in a robe, watching TV and cookies, just waiting for me to try to say, hey, I want to think of something original, or I want to write a poem or write a book or whatever? And then the other part is I think about creativity as residing in this place between worlds, maybe, where I visualize it as a dark forest. Not that it's so dark you can't see, but if you have two different types of reality side by side, then that space between it, where they touch or where they don't, is somewhere where you can go halfway in, and maybe the other side can go halfway into, like walking halfway into a forest. You can only walk halfway in, because once you're halfway, you're walking out the other side. But maybe we can't go to the other side because it's just a different type of existence. So then the creative force, whether it's connecting with something like ourselves in a parallel universe or something else, or if it's something else altogether, just go along with this forest motif for a minute, that the more often you engage with it, then it recognizes you as a way that it can try to communicate with you as well. So perhaps that creative force that you see as a creative force, it also sees you as something that it gains as well. There could be an ominous side effect to that, but I try not to think about that part of it. I just think of this exchange of ideas, of creativity, or working as a conduit for these other things, being inspired, amused, getting a feeling, understanding things that maybe as humans were kept from understanding because this reality we're living in requires us to not understand all these other things that are outside of us. So you're just getting this little brush against this creative force. And if the universe and everything is created by some sort of intelligent design, then creativity recognizes creativity. And if we're made in that image, if you go with the Bible version of it, then of course we like creativity because that's the image we are made in, is in a being that is creative as well. So I wonder if you have a connection to all that maybe you weren't showing up for, or you weren't being open to, because I think you can ignore all that. And again, that goes back to what's creativity doing while I'm not paying attention to it or ignoring it. And that's the difference between writers and not writers, is you get those little messages or those ideas and you write them down in a notepad that you can leave in a coffee shop or that you take with you. And that's the difference, because some people don't even receive that much. They don't even consider that much. They just are going on about their lives, doing what they're doing. And I think it takes all kinds, but I think creativity is there for everyone to tap into. And the more you try to communicate with it, or whatever you want to call it, engage with it, that the more it recognizes you, and you'll feel more of that. For me, poetry was like that because I liked writing books. And then I had a bunch of poems just from collecting over the years that I thought I need to put these together and then maybe see if I can do some more poetry. Maybe it'll help me with my dialogue in books, and just the fun way of communicating with people, thinking about what you're saying more. It's a more lyrical way of talking. Also, you can get across more complex ideas, because for me, poetry is more about feeling and writing is more about explaining and understanding things. But poetry, you're tapping into that something that everybody can understand. And it might be the same way you understand it. It might be a different way that you understand it. But I did a poetry book, and I thought, then I'll be done with poetry. I can go back to writing books. But I showed up so often to that dark forest and walk down those paths that it doesn't leave me alone now. And I understand it's always there. And it's always there when you're in the store and you're like, oh, that's a thing I need to write down. And you write it down in your notes on a notepad in your phone, whatever. And then you organize it later. And sometimes you get a whole poem at once. Sometimes you get dialogue for some other book you're working on, or some other idea for a short story, or whatever it is. I think those creative forces are different. I think poetry creative force is different than the prose writing a book versus painting versus music and all that. They definitely know each other, but it's just a different feeling that you can focus in on. So now I'm 3 or 4 years into it and a couple poetry books, and I can't stop writing poetry just because it's always there. And you've forgotten things so much when you think of a good line and then you don't write it down and then you regret it later. So that only has to happen a few times before you just stop whatever you're doing, if you can, and write down the idea you're having so you don't forget it. So maybe that's what's going on with you, is that you're a poet and you're not maybe not embracing it as much as you could. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very possible. I think, what I was trying to do was segment it into like songs and songwriting. So yeah, that's what I tried to do. And that's kind of similar, because when you're looking for a melody, a lot of times it's like trying to hear something that is very, very faint and you could barely hear it sometimes. It's just, but yet it's like haunting you. And so, but other times, like there was one song I woke up in the middle of the night, I wrote down the entire thing just from, word one to the last one, and it was finished. And I didn't have to rewrite it. I didn't have to do anything. And I think what's interesting about songwriting too, and this is something I forgot to mention. Sometimes what I would do is, like, when I read I read the LA Times newspaper every morning, and sometimes what I would do is words would jump out at me just from the paper, and I would write them down. And then I would go into my 18 minutes and then try to make something of them. It sounds crazy, but it was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like a haunting kind of thing. And I did write one fictional novel a long time ago. That was the first thing that I wrote, and that was like I thought I was painting a room, a bedroom, and then I realized I was painting a school or something. It was like it just went on and on. It was so much work, and I really novelists, I really admire them because that is a lot of work. And so in this, now when I did this historical fiction thing, this trial of William Shakespeare, I was frightened because I've never done that before. And coming from songwriting or just playing around with lyrics and things like that. And but I'd written these nonfiction books about Shakespeare. So the last beta reader from another book said, I think that you should put it into a fiction, historical fiction. I think you could do it, and I think you'd be good at it. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'll try it. So she said, write a scene, and my thought was my dialogue is going to be cringeworthy. I'm going to put thee and thou, and I mean this is happening back in the days of Shakespeare, right? So I wrote this scene where like Queen Elizabeth is in a longboat because it's during this Spanish Armada, and I wanted to figure out her character in this. And I thought she's going to be headstrong. She wants to know what's going on, so she's going to get 18 guys to, bring her out so she can see the damage, what's going on, and then. So I wrote this chapter and I sent it to this woman, and she responded in an email with just the word "yeah," like spelled YEAH, in all caps, and, with the exclamation point. So I thought, okay, well, but then I never used that chapter. I just, I like tossed it, or I mean, I kept it in a file, but it got me. That was the thing that got me started. It was kind of weird because I had to figure out like how am I going to play this. So then I made a rule that these characters in this book are going to arrive as holograms from this machine, and yet the defense attorney, whose name is Mike McKenzie, can go back in time, and he can see things that are happening back in the 1580s and understand what that love story was between Edward de Vere and his wife. Well, what made them. Well, we know what drove them apart. He went to Italy. Edward de Vere lived in Italy for like basically a year, and he left in January, and his wife gave birth to a child in July. So he believed that she was unfaithful to him, and so he didn't talk to her for 5 years. And what's interesting, this is another get into one of these tidbit things, but if you were to take a map of Italy and put colored pushpins into the places where Edward de Vere stayed during his visit to Italy, they are the settings of the 13 plays of Shakespeare. So it's kind of like there is all this little stuff that goes into there's not like an aha moment. This guy was Shakespeare. It's kind of like a cumulative kind of the circumstantial case with all the evidence. When you see the spelling and these other things behind it, you realize this had to be the guy. And then, like I said, it makes the plays. Or if you watch the play, I would advise to just watch plays. But if you read them, you can see, you understand different things or things differently. But to make a long story short,
yeah, if he wasn't writing the stuff that attributed to Shakespeare, then Shakespeare was writing about him.
Yeah, if you got to look at Shakespeare's signatures, though.
Mm.
I've been
Yeah,
a I've been a notary public for over 30 years, and I've seen people who are illiterate, and they're really embarrassed about. They don't want people to watch them write. It, it's they're embarrassed that they can't write, and so when they write, and because as a notary public, they have to sign my journal, right? So I have to watch them, and they take forever. I sold one of the first houses I sold was to a guy who was illiterate, and he would sign with an X, and the first X took him. I'm not kidding. Took him 7 minutes, and so I told him, "What if we make it into a cross?" Oh man, he went through the 30 pages like in 30 seconds. So it's like his brain, you know, understood what a cross was, but it didn't understand like his signature. So yeah, I don't think that the Stratford guy could even. I don't think he was a total front.
How did the Earl meet his end versus Shakespeare meet his end?
Okay, so one of the interesting things about the Earl of Oxford is his date of death is supposedly April. No, no, it's June 24th, which was the day of the summer solstice. So there is a theory that he didn't actually die on the date, that he kind of hid out in the woods like Robin Hood. So, but he supposedly died on the first day of, or on April 24th, 1604. And that's the big, or one of the biggest complaints against the Oxfordian theory is that several of Shakespeare's plays were written after his death. And however, if you look at the plays, there's only two plays that really could be argued that were written after his death. And those two are Macbeth and The Tempest. So now the Stratford guy died in 1616. He died on his birthday. And that's why people tend to go with him, because they kind of, it's kind of like if you want to believe that someone died in 1616, you would make all these associations. So in The Tempest, for example, there's a line in the Tempest that says Bermoothes. So it was always interpreted as the islands Bermudas. So there was a shipwreck of the ship, the Sea Venture, which happened in 1609. And so historians or these Shakespeare experts will say, well, this ship, sank in 1609, and therefore it's referred to in The Tempest, and De Vere died in 1604. He can't be the author then. But there were tons of shipwrecks prior to 1609. And in my book, I actually say that it's a mistake. There's actually a constellation called Boötes, which is this ox driver, this man who had 7 oxes, and he's trying to get the little bear and the big bear in the constellation. And if you think about The Tempest, there's the play itself is talking about somebody in Italy wanting to marry his daughter to the king of Tunisia's son. Tunisia's in Africa, and Italy, and between the coast is Sicily. So Sicily would be the logical place. It's like a halfway point between the two. And there's areas there that they're known for having storms or tempests. So it makes more sense and also because on that island in Sicily, there's a place called Castle Bueno where they have manna that was like mentioned in the Bible, that grows on trees there. And so in the Tempest, they the line that talks about Bermuthus talks about dew, and in the ancient Greek and Romans would call manna dew. That was their nickname for it. It was kind of like a wild edible plant, like a olive tree brand, stuff from an olive tree or something, but it was edible, and so you could eat it. So to me, that makes more sense than having something that was published in 1623, even though the ship sank in 1609, it wasn't put in the newspapers until 1623. So somehow Shakespeare, who died in 1616, put it into a play in 1611. You know what I mean? So to me, it just seems more logical that, it could have been written prior to Edward de Vere's death in 1604. If he died in 1604, there's a good chance that he lived.
Four, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. So we'll just go from there. So it's more likely that it happened prior to 1604. Do you have a timeline in your book about all this, like a visual depiction of it?
I don't. The visuals I tried to pick out were about the spelling mostly, so that readers could see what I'm talking about. It's been known that William Shakespeare wrote in what's called secretary hand, and secretary hand had a J and an I, and all the letters. Okay, so Edward de Vere learned. So when he was 4 years old, his parents had him live with the house of Sir William Smith. The guy's name, Sir Thomas Smith, I think it was. So Smith used to be the secretary for King Henry VIII, and he taught Greek at Oxford University, and he believed that it was easier for someone to learn Greek first and then Latin. This is important because of all the books back then, like 90% or 95% were written in either Greek or Latin. And that's why it was important for someone to learn, Latin. That you had to take a test before they would allow you into a university or college. So Edward de Vere entered college at age 8 because his Latin and Greek was so good. However, this affected his spelling because instead of using a J, for example, he would use an I. And so it's kind of like when you look at Shakespeare's words again, Shakespeare never uses a J. Even in Juliet, that's spelled with an I. So when you as a reader can see this and you realize, okay, that this doesn't make sense, that someone who, because back then a lot of people wouldn't use an I, they would use a Y. They would spell king, K-Y-N-G. And it was Edward de Vere who, we see. So what I did too is there's another book that Shakespeare relied heavily on, and it was called Metamorphoses by Arthur Golding. And Arthur Golding translated it from Latin, 15 books. And Golding was the uncle for Edward de Vere, and they lived in the same house, in Cecil House, together. And he wrote a book called Trogus prior to translating Metamorphoses. And in Trogus, he never used the word Yao, not once. in Metamorphosis, I looked through that. We find it 8 times. So I think that Edward de Vere was helping translate with his uncle this 15 book thing. Another more words like that are like the word she, he, me. He would add an extra E to them. This is Edward de Vere. And in Trogus, Golding never does this. Then in Metamorphosis, suddenly you see all these double E's. She, it's kind of interesting when you see it. So what about Shakespeare? When you look at William Shakespeare, you never think of him spelling the word she, with 2 E's. But how many times did I find it there? How many times would just take a wild guess?
Every time?
No, 356 times in all the plays and poems. So, I mean, it shows that I think that he was responsible.
Where is the best place for people to find your book?
Probably Amazon Kindle, or you can go to my website. It's robertboog.com.
And does that have your real estate books as well? Did you publish those on Amazon?
Yes.
Okay. What are you working on now?
Right now I'm doing some reading. It's kind of like I just finished this book maybe a week and a half ago or something. So this is the time when I kind of absorb words and get to read, listen to music. I'm all into, if you like good songs, there's an artist, what's his name, Noah Khan. Have you heard of him at all?
I haven't.
Yeah, it's his last name is spelled Kahan. He has a song called Drunk Dial or Dial Drunk with Post Malone. Okay. You can find that you can just look it up on YouTube. And his album, Stick Season, I mean, all the songs from that are really good. And he's a very good poet. I mean, I applaud and admire him. So that's the kind of thing I like to do, is like listen to music and listen to lyrics and read and kind of like give myself a little break, reward from, finishing this last thing. So what about yourself? What do you do when you're finished with the project?
Usually I have a few going at the same time in various states, and you have the main one you're working on, and then you have some other peripheral ones. So then you just see which peripheral one demands the most attention. And usually that's how books go for me, is you have the idea, it's in your head, and then eventually it just gets to the point where you're thinking about it all the time. So you have to write it so you don't have to think about it all the time. And then poetry is just, you have that, and that's always there, that you're just always writing down a line here or there, or sometimes you'll have a moment and write down a whole poem or work on some other ones. So right now, currently, I'm trying to finish a poetry book by the end of the year, but that's that. And then thinking about some science fiction things. But yeah, I like the ability to publish on Amazon, just because you have so much more control over it. And I think it probably does mean that there's a lot less, or a lot more things that are less edited that are published than would be if you just had to go through a publishing house. But there's also a lot more to draw from. I think that you don't have the gatekeepers of the publishing houses so much anymore, that you can do a good job editing and take it serious, and then put a book together that looks like a book that is available for people. Now, how you market it and how it gets out, that's different. How much time you put into it versus the chance of somebody seeing it. I don't know. I think there's a lot of writers that are not successful while they're alive, that people find it after they're gone, and then they think, oh, they can discover all these other things. So.
Yeah, that's kind of the scary thing about writing, is that a lot of people aren't discovered until after their deaths. So I try to enjoy life a little bit in between a project, and just let some of these things like brew a little bit. I think I've finally gotten rid of the Shakespeare bug, though. It was kind of like really something that I wanted to get through, I guess.
I understand. I got an idea for a book for you. I'll pitch to you after we stop recording, so you can do what you will with it. But I think it might be right up your alley.
Okay.
So your website is, I think I have it for the show notes, robertboog.com. And do you have your Amazon's authors page going?
There is one, yeah. I think I updated it recently, or not too long ago. And then also you can find some of the songs I've written on YouTube. I've usually just thrown them out there. I had one I wrote called Kobe. That one received it got like 30,000 downloads the first month it came out and stuff. So the good thing about a song is kind of like a little story that is like 2 or 3 minutes long, and people will tell you, you get instant gratification. I like it or I didn't like it, kind of thing. So that's the difference between a poem, because poems are usually, in books, and harder to get access, for a lot of people.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of poetry readings out there. And I'm not sure I'm a fan of poetry reading. I think a poem needs to be digested in quiet contemplation. I think if you're out there reading a poem, that's a different, it's still a poem. It's a different type of thing than I engage with. But like, you wouldn't go out and just read Leaves of Grass cover to cover. But if you read a few poems every day, then you could probably get through it. Or just when the time strikes you, you go back. And then if you find one or two that you really like, I think that's a success as far as poetry goes. Songs are easier, I think, to digest, because I think it's that thing between a book and a poem where it does tell the story. It has that beginning and the end, or it's engaging in that way. Plus it has the music with it, which is, obviously people are musical beings. So you go to the raising your vibration and all that. It taps in to something else that makes it easier, I think, to replay in your head. And it's more acceptable to listen to a song when you're driving down the road or running than it is to listen to poetry with no words, or poetry with no music. So yeah, I think you're right that
well, I found that I make more money with audiobooks too, and that's what I found is that a lot of people digest their content differently nowadays. So it's kind of weird. The other thing, like with songs, I had this one, or there's this radio. I forget the name of it. It's okay. So it's a radio program, and when your songs are listed there, they actually give you the listeners' kind of demographics. And what I was surprised was how young my demographic was. I'm writing songs thinking that, it's between the age of 35 and 65 or something. And my actual demographic was like between 14 and 24 or something. It's crazy. So it's you don't always know who your audience is. And that's it's the beauty of it. And it's kind of scary at the same time, like who is my reader, I guess. But yeah, I just try to do the best I can. And that's all all you can really do, I guess.
Yeah. Have that creative outlet. Do you have anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts in closing?
No, I think I again my purpose, the purpose in life, I think, is to be a creator. That's my belief, that that is your purpose. So go out and create, find you're out on the what's called the leading edge, where you're trying to figure out stuff that will be of interest to the general public, I think. And be creative in whatever you do. And I think that's just helpful for people, to document it. That's kind of what my real estate book was originally. Like, hey, I'm doing something differently now. Here's what I'm doing. Nowadays, it's commonplace. People, when I first, published my book, the Selling Homes 1, 2, 3, asking for people's financials, I got so many emails, hate mails from brokers and agents saying I was invading people's privacy, asking them to bring me this, private information of theirs. And, everybody hated me. And then next thing I knew, it's the way it is. I mean, it's kind of like nobody has a second thought about uploading it or, finding it or anything like that. Now, I used to kind of control people with it. Like if somebody says, well, I think I'm going to go with Joe Schmo down the street. Well, you're going to have to get copies from the IRS. That could take several months, because you gave them to me. I had you sign this paper. So, yeah, I did kind of use that a little bit, but
That took a malevolent turn.
well, it was a nice, if I've shown them a home and now suddenly they want to use Joe Schmo, I just have to steer them back on the right side of things,
Yeah, it's the cutthroat world of real estate.
Oh yeah. Yeah. People all of a sudden, oh, my mother is a realtor. Oh, yeah. You showed me all these homes and now I'm going to use her. Well, good luck getting your taxes. And that was what I was trying to say. And then I would call the person and say, were you just trying to be helpful for your son? And I just want to make, clarify my thinking here. And then it was always, no, I was just looking out for him. I just wanted to make sure you were on the ball and stuff like that. So no, I was never malevolent about it. I was always, it was, we established this agreement in the beginning. I was just kind of enforcing what we had agreed upon.
All right. Well, links are going to be in the show notes, and I'll get some of your author's page and your YouTube links from you, and I'll put those in there as well. And I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.